This is France 24, and U.S. President Donald Trump has pulled back on his threats to launch devastating strikes on Iran, and this 2 hours before his deadline for Tehran to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Well, Trump de-escalated, saying he would hold off his threatened attacks on Iranian industrial and civilian targets for 2 weeks. Shortly after that, Tehran proposed a 10-point peace plan. We're going to take a look at all of this now with international politics specialist Scott Lucas, who joins me live. Scott, how surprised were you when you heard about this 11th hour ceasefire?
I was 50-50 here. When I woke up very early this morning in Ireland, I half expected to get alerts that the United States had expanding its bombing, especially of civilian infrastructure across Iran. But I half expected that Donald Trump would back away. And indeed, it was the latter that happened. I think we can go into the reasons why he backed away.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, in your opinion, what changed?
I think we always were the case that just simply expanding the airstrikes on Iran, despite all of Trump's bluster about ending Iranian civilization, it will die tonight, he said, wasn't going to bring about regime surrender. This regime has held out for almost 6 weeks, despite those airstrikes, despite the killing of its supreme leader, despite the killing of dozens of officials and commanders. So if the airstrikes alone aren't going to bring regime surrender, let's put it that way, you only have two options. If you're the Trump administration, you either have to put ground troops in or you have to go into talks with the Iranians. So why didn't he put ground troops in? I think there's a combination of factors here. I think the first is that the U.S. military, I think, told him it was not going to be easy, that this would not be a walkover, even if you're talking about trying to attack the Iranian islands. Secondly, I think you've got the question of domestic opinion in the United States, which already 60% of people were against the war in the first place, and that number would increase if there were ground troops. Thirdly, any ground operations would further cause instability in the oil and stock markets. And then fourthly, some members of his administration, notably the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who has been in Hungary, they are against this war continuing. And I think all of that converged where you had that space for the Pakistani mediators to go and say, all right, let's talk. But here's the key thing. The extent of Trump's surrender is not only did he say, okay, we'll talk, but the talks will be on Iran's terms, on its 10-point platform, and not on the 15-point ultimatum that the Trump people were circulating a couple of weeks ago.
And yet it does seem that, at least for the U.S. side, Trump, in his usual blustery way, is putting forth very confident predictions about this deal that does still seem very unclear. Are both sides just trying to claim this as a victory no matter what?
Well, I mean, both sides will claim it as a victory. I mean, that's got to be the nature of trying to say, look, you know, we have the upper hand here. So I think that raises the challenge for us in terms of journalists and analysts to assess where we are. And where we are probably is two things. First of all, that on February 26th, just 2 days before the start of the war, the U.S. was demanding a permanent end to Iran's nuclear program, civilian nuclear program. That's not in the Iranian 10-point plan. It was demanding that Iran give up or limit its ballistic missiles. That's not in the Iranian 10 points. It was demanding that Iran break its links with groups across the Middle East. Iran is not planning on doing that. And then in addition to that, the second aspect is that since going to war, Iran has actually increased or improved its position by taking control of the Strait of Hormuz. And its proposal would say that it continues to control the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran has seized the diplomatic initiative here, no matter what Trump says about some supposed victory.
So given all of that, what's going to come out of these negotiations in Pakistan that are due to begin on Friday?
Well, I mean, that's the huge question, because, of course, we've only got a 2-week respite in terms of a ceasefire. Now, we know that the Iranians have said they'll accept the talks, and, of course, they have these points they'll want to push. Will the Americans show up? Real estate developer Steve Witkoff, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, possibly the Vice President, J.D. Vance. And if they show up, will they be there to negotiate with the Iranians, or will they try to reclaim their advantage by putting the ultimatum? You must give up your nuclear program. You must give up or talk about ballistic missiles, which returns us back to the position in February. And then, of course, the open question here is, would the Trump administration, having stepped back from ground operations, would it renew the war against Iran? And let us not forget that all of this is happening while we still have the open question beyond these talks about Iran continuing its war in southern Lebanon.
Indeed, because there's another bit of confusion there is the Pakistani prime minister saying that the ceasefire had included Lebanon, Israel saying that that's not the case. I mean, given all of this confusion and lack of clarity at this point, if you were a betting man, what would you say? How likely is it this war will indeed go on?
I think it's folly to try to predict this. I mean, I think the problem with predictions here is you put yourself into a setup where if it doesn't pan out that way, there's yet another, as it were, almost resignation that we can't get out of this. I think what we have to do is we have to lay out the key points here in terms of the damage and the instability that has been caused and ask, can this be limited in the long term? And that brings us back to, can you come back to an accommodation over Iran's nuclear program, which is not just simply someone fronting up and saying, we have to destroy it? Secondly, can you come to an accommodation of where Iran and other countries are in the region where you don't have to say it has to be regime change or else? Thirdly, we have to get to the point which talks about a stable arrangement for economic arrangements, such as shipping through the Strait of Hormuz, such as trade arrangements, such as energy supplies. And beyond all of that, we have to get back to some sort of space where people in Iran, people in Lebanon, people in Israel, people across the region in the Gulf can have some sense of security and peace. And all we can do is to try and reinforce that message that discussions and dialogue is much better to achieve all of those goals rather than renewing violence and confrontation.
Scott, thank you for sharing all of your expertise with us. That's international politics specialist Scott Lucas.